A big hello to everybody. I'm rocking a new BRS t-shirt today. My name is Matthew. I am your BRS beginner guru. We're coming at you with episode 38, part A, part B, nope, part C in the beginner how-to guide for saltwater aquariums and reef tanks. Top 10 beginner mistakes. But as I said last video, I talked way too much in parts A and B because I only got through the 5 beginner mistakes. But all we're gonna do today, right here, right now, is finish up in part C with the remaining 5 beginner mistakes. Common beginner mistake number 6, not preventing pests from entering your display tank. First off, don't be like me when I started in the hobby and was so afraid of any pests that I took draconian measures. Pests are going to appear in your tank. It's just going to happen from time to time. But we can probably reduce the amount of pests that are added. But know this. Once you do find a pest in your display tank, there are going to be ways that we can deal with it and remove it if need be. Most pests I have found will enter with new coral frags, and the best thing you can learn to do is have a proper quarantine for corals and properly dip them. There are all sorts of different products out there you can use for dipping your corals, and you will be amazed at how many pests will fall off your corals during that process. But even if you quarantine and dip all new coral frags, some pests will just get through. Most pests can be kept in check through some sort of mixture of purchasing the right livestock that will eat it and manual removal. One of the most common pests that comes in on coral frags is called Aiptasia. It is an almost translucent pinkish looking anemone that, if not kept in check, will quickly spread throughout your tank. It can sting your corals and cause them to retract. There are many ways to get rid of Aiptasia though. I've had Aiptasia in all of my tanks, and as soon as I notice it, you can either get something like a peppermint shrimp or some other fish out there that actually like to eat the Aiptasia, or there are a whole bunch of products out there that you can target the Aiptasia directly and kill it. But of course, the absolute best way to prevent pests from getting into your display tank is anytime you get new corals, what you're going to want to do is first of all put them through some sort of coral dip, remove them from their frag plugs, put them on new frag plugs, and ideally put them in a quarantine tank for 3 weeks so you can watch them closely and remove any pests that appear. Then take them out of there, dip them one more time before placing them in your display tank. You might be wondering, but how do I do that? Well, this isn't the video to go into details, but stay tuned to the series because we will cover that later. Just know that there are pests in this hobby, but an ounce of prevention really goes a long way. But if and when pests appear in your display tank, don't panic, don't panic. They can be kept in check or removed through various measures. Common beginner mistake number 7 is not knowing how to correctly interpret test results. And I don't blame a beginner. How are you supposed to know what to test for, how often to test for it, and what do those results even tell you about your tank? In any new system, the top tier of important things to test for is ammonia and nitrite, because these are toxic for your fish. If your ammonia creeps above 0.25 and starts approaching 0.5 or even more, there's some issue with your tank that needs to be dealt with quickly. The same is going to be true if you notice your nitrites creeping up as well, but typically if you're testing frequently, you will notice your ammonia creeping up first, followed by your nitrites. Just for reference, in a fully cycled and established aquarium, you should never have ammonia or nitrite in your tank. They will always be near 0. The second tier of testing importance is NO3 and PO4, your nitrates and phosphates. Testing frequently and understanding the results will not only help you keep your nuisance algae in check, but also help prevent the growth of cyanobacteria and dinoflagellates. But you're only going to be able to succeed here if you test frequently, at least once a week and maybe twice a week when you're starting out a new tank. Because if those nutrient levels creep too high, you have to intervene quickly so you don't get a nuisance algae outbreak. But if the opposite is true and they drop down to 0, you also need to intervene so you don't get cyanobacteria or dinoflagellates. After that, you have your third tier of testing importance in a new system, and that is calcium and alkalinity. New hobbyists, and I am totally guilty of this, often will panic if their calcium and alkalinity get a little bit out of whack, and they may take drastic measures to get to some sort of ideal number in their brain. But honestly, most corals can survive anywhere from 375 to probably even something like 500. So even though we recommend a range between 400 and 450, If your calcium levels get a little bit high or a little bit low, there's really nothing to panic about. The same is true for alkalinity. You might really want to have an ideal number of 9 DKH, but if you live in a dank apartment in the wintertime that's full of carbon dioxide, you might just not be able to achieve those levels. And yes, that may slow down your coral growth, but as long as your corals look happy and healthy, there's really nothing to panic about. Just for an example, all of my tanks right now are for some reason testing above 450 calcium, some of them even above 500. I have no idea why. I'm not dosing some of these tanks, but you know what? I look at the tanks, I look at the corals, they're growing, they're happy, they're healthy, their colors are good, so I don't worry about it. And finally, in your last tier of important things to test for are your minor and trace elements. To be totally frank with you, I rarely, if ever, test for these things because I perform frequent water changes, so I know those minor and trace elements are getting replenished. The only exceptions to the rule are if there are some sort of problems. For example, when I had problems back here in my anemone tank, a lot of people told me that low iodine levels could be the problem. So I did end up testing this tank and discovering that my iodine levels were low. But as long as you keep up on your weekly or every other week water changes, I wouldn't even consider testing for minor and trace elements until a year or 2 years down the road once you have a better understanding of this hobby and the importance of all the other tests out there. Common beginner mistake number 8 is trying to balance pH, calcium, and alkalinity. I'm going to try to find you guys some pictures, maybe even a couple of videos, and they're going to be terrible, I'm sorry, but this is of my first Red Sea Reefer 170. We had just gotten back from a year in Honolulu, and we really didn't have any money because it's very expensive to live there. So we rented this dank basement apartment on Mercer Island, which is just right outside of Seattle. It was kind of nasty. We had 4 of us living in a small 2-bedroom, and I saved up money every month from working at the Hyatt in Bellevue, and I finally put this tank together. And of course, I wanted to be the perfect hobbyist, which meant making sure my pH, my calcium, and my alkalinity levels were correct all the time. But I struggled. I could not, for the life of me, get my pH anywhere near 8.0, and my alkalinity was always sitting somewhere around 7. And I just couldn't figure it out. And the only thing that made sense to me was that we were breathing so much in this little apartment that our carbon dioxide levels were so high that it was lowering the pH and the DKH. I started doing things like adding airline tubing into my skimmer. I even ran it all the way outside. I would open up the apartment a lot more than I should have, increasing our electric bill just to get in some fresh oxygen and get that carbon dioxide out. I tried things like kalkwasser reactors, and all that ended up doing was temporarily raising my pH and my DKH, but gunking up all of my pumps. No matter what I did, seriously, the numbers wouldn't go up. And at the end of the day, what I realized years down the road is it just didn't matter. Yes, a low pH meant that my corals probably grew more slowly than they should have. But it was just a reality of living in a dank, cramped apartment with 4 people in the wintertime in Seattle. I can't tell you how often I would try to use the calculators to dose the right amount of calcium and the right amount of alkalinity to keep my numbers perfect. I wanted, 425 calcium and like 9.0 DKH. And so I would keep adding and adding some sort of soda ash mixture, but all that ended up happening is it would precipitate out. I could not get the buffering right, which meant I couldn't get the pH right. And the biggest mistake here was trying to chase these numbers. If your tank looks healthy, if your corals are happy, don't worry about those numbers. If you're close to the preferred range, your tank's probably going to be fine. Let your tank dictate the exact numbers. Now that I live here in beautiful Palm Springs, we have the windows open all the time, my tanks have no problem with a DKH of 9 or 10. But in Seattle, it just wasn't possible. So don't chase after the perfect numbers. Let your tank dictate to you what those numbers should be and use that as a baseline. Common beginner mistake number 9, overfeeding your fish. It is so easy to overfeed your fish because number 1, it is fun to feed your fish, and your fish will understand feeding time, and you'll walk by your tank all the time and they'll be like little puppies and they'll come to the glass and they'll be like, feed me, feed me, feed me, and be like, oh, you're so cute, let me just throw in some food. And most beginners are probably going to be feeding pellets, but the problem with pellets is they are 5 to 10 times more nutrient dense by weight when compared to frozen food. So if we just stop by and put a little bit in all the time, a lot of that food is going to go to waste. It's going to cause way more fish poop. It's going to end up in our filter socks, and we're going to see our nitrate and phosphate levels start going through the roof, which, as we all know, is going to lead to some sort of nuisance algae outbreak. And not only can overfeeding lead to nuisance algae, but you can also have fat fish. Just like I can eat junk food all the time, and during the pandemic, it is true, I've gotten rid of half my t-shirts because I've gained 20 pounds, I think, like a lot of us have. Your fish can eat too much, and they can eat too much of the wrong food, and it can cause them to become unhealthy, which may decrease their length of life. But you might ask, Matthew, how do you know if you're overfeeding your fish? The best way is to test for your nitrate and your phosphates frequently. If your nitrates and your phosphates are going up, 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 you're overfeeding. At this point, once you notice you're overfeeding, you really have two options. Option number 1 is feed less. Option number 2 is filter more, or just do some sort of combination of both. But you might also be saying, Matthew, I can't feed less. I have so many fish in this tank and they need the food. Maybe you have anthias, maybe you have chromis, maybe you have fish that just need to feed all day, so you don't have the option of feeding less. Well, if you can't feed less, then one, you could switch foods. If you're relying heavily on pellet or flake foods, switch to frozen foods. That will help a lot. But if you still have the problem, you're just gonna have to filter more. What does that mean? That means more mechanical filtration for the most part. That means changing out your filter socks more frequently, and that also means doing something like a protein skimmer if you don't have one already. If you don't have a tank that has a sump, there are hang on the back protein skimmers or small protein skimmers that can fit in a rear filtration chamber. But you can go a step further and do some sort of macroalgae. You can put macroalgae in a sump, kind of refugium. You can do some sort of algae scrubber, which can be externally plumbed, or you can do some sort of chaetomorpha reactor that can fit really anywhere in your tank. There are all sorts of ways to adding macroalgae depending on the type of tank you have, and if you have high nitrate and phosphate levels that you can't get down through any other kinds of mechanical filtration, adding macroalgae can be the solution for you. I solved the overfeeding problem in my harem tank primarily through a few ways. First, I stopped feeding pellet foods and I switched to frozen foods. Next, I made the skim on my protein skimmer much more wet so it removed more from the water column. And lastly, I upped my filter sock changing schedule from 1 time a week to 2 times a week. And common beginner mistake number 10, not understanding the limits of a cleanup crew. Well, guess what? We're actually gonna skip this one because as I was writing this, I realized that episode 39, our next episode, is all about cleanup crews. As always, everybody, thanks for watching. Happy reefing. Be well. We'll see you next time.